Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
We are coming to you with our first episode of 2026, and it should be no surprise that the topic of today's episode is what has been dominating the news: fraud. We are going to kick things off with a little holiday recap, as well as discussing our intentions and resolutions for 2026. Then we will get into the chaos that has had us all transfixed this last week, the new developments when it comes to fraud. We'll start by breaking down the viral video from YouTuber Nick Shirley that took us all by storm last week. We will get into the responses and reactions from Republicans, Democrats, Governor Walz, and our congressional delegation, and more. And then we will turn our attention to the actions and plans from the Trump administration, including a hearing on Capitol Hill, DHS investigations, and the halt of daycare payments from the federal government. There's a lot going on, and it's evolving every day and even every hour, but we will do our best to get you up to speed and with some color commentary along the way. Thank you for joining us today, and enjoy the show. We are here with our first show of 2026. It's been an exciting time, exciting new year. Holidays were great. Did you have a good Christmas?
I had a wonderful Christmas with family. It was great to be with family over the holiday season. Did not get a lump of coal this year, which was good, but just had a wonderful time with family and just partaking in all of the festivities. How about you?
It was great. You know, we have our son Wyatt, who's 3.5, and then little baby Walker. And so it was so fun. Walker is starting to army crawl and stand up. And so he's into everything, loves the lights, loves the chaos that's just around him. And Wyatt loves Christmas. Obviously, what kid doesn't love presents, but he loves presents for everybody. He helped everybody open every single present. And each time his statements were like, a box, a pair of pants. Like it didn't matter what it was or who it was for. He just was joyous and excited and to be involved and help everybody open. Santa brought the boys a giant ball pit, which has been a huge hit.
I'm not surprised they were on the nice list.
Yes,
and that's a nice gift. That's really good.
I don't think Santa fully thought through the fact that parents have to pick up those balls every evening. Wyatt helps as well, but it was 1,000 pack of balls, and
that's a lot of balls.
It's a chore, but both of them love it, and it's been so fun. So yeah, it was a really great time. It was really fun ages for the boys to be around.
Bring up a sensitive subject. What was the Christmas meal?
Lasagna.
Oh, does that sound good?
Yeah. So we do at my mom's house. We did monkey bread at home in the morning.
Love monkey bread.
And then at my mom's house, we have some, appetizers, good charcuterie board, and then lasagna. And then it's actually my brother-in-law's birthday on Christmas. And so my sister always brings over an ice cream cake for us to also celebrate his birthday.
Oh, that's great. My birthday is 2 days before Christmas. And so I always, I had one sister who always used to give me a joint gift. And it still makes me mad to this day.
Yeah.
But everyone else, there was good separation. But no, I love Christmas dinner. We had roast beef with family.
Ooh, that sounds good.
Sorry, prime rib, fresh prime rib, which was great.
Delish.
A little awkward conversation discussed, if I may, and I kind of prepped in advance that things were going to get just work with me here for a second. I was down with relatives, visiting out of state, getting cleaned up for the Christmas Day activities. Take a shower, and guess what happens? I get locked into the shower. I can't get out of the shower.
Like a shower stall?
The shower stall is locked. The thing's locked.
Oh, my God.
And so I assume most people, when they take a shower, have their phone in there. I was streaming something on Netflix and then had to make a phone call to have someone come get me out of the shower. Guess who had to rescue me from the shower?
Your mom.
My brother-in-law. My brother-in-law had to come down and rescue me from the shower. Now, at that point in the exercise, there was a towel. I was covered. I was decent. But I just want to give a shout out to my brother-in-law, Greg, for saving me and being my hero on Christmas morning by getting me out of the shower that I was stuck with down at their house. He was my hero. He came in, saved me. He was gentle. He was kind. He was respectful. He was responsible. He didn't victimize me, but he had to come and get the shower. I was literally trapped in there. Literally trapped in. He handed me my glasses to try to figure. I was all steamy. I couldn't see anything. It was just chaos. But I want to give a shout out to my brother-in-law, Greg, for being my hero on Christmas Day and saving me with dignity and class from the shower.
Well, I am so glad that you lived to tell about it.
Now, I will say there is a tasteful photograph of me being rescued, not the other way around. Okay,
Oh my
but
God.
me being rescued from the shower. It was just hilarious. It was a fun family moment, and it's something that my brother-in-law and I will cherish forever.
Absolutely. I'll be talking about it for years to come. We also have, it's officially a new year, which means we had New Year's Eve. I will say this year on New Year's Eve, I went back and listened to our episode, the first one of 2025, and I talked about how we stayed up and celebrated the Puerto Rico New Year's that year. I have to say, we didn't make it to that this year.
Okay.
I did fall asleep in my toddler's room while putting him to bed on New Year's Eve, and my
In the
husband
ball
came and woke
pit.
me up. Not in the ball pit. Not in the ball pit. My husband woke me up around 9, and we were both tucked into bed around 9:30. It was a rip-roaring good time.
That's delightful. I gotta say, the ball pit, depending on how big it is, I mean, that might be a nice place to take a nap.
It could be. It's
It really
very
could.
large.
It very could be. Absolutely. So yeah, I stayed awake. I stay in on New Year's, always have, and I stayed in. I don't want to be out driving, doing anything. I stayed awake. I went to Costco around just before 6 o'clock with my daughters, and I picked up a case of bottled Coke, commonly known as Mexican Coke, in the bottle, real cane sugar, real caffeine. And I drank it, and boy, oh boy, I'm not a big caffeine drinker. And so I was wide awake, made it well past midnight, and had a really nice night. My family conked out just around midnight, but I was wide awake. We had some, my kids had some friends over too, but I was wide awake, and then organized my keychain. That's what I did on New Year's Eve night, rang in the bell, saw the ball drop, and spent the night organizing my keychain, and it was a great night. And then got ready to watch Stranger Things, which I watched, which I'm not going to ruin any surprises for anyone, but I have to tell you, if you don't get teared up at the end of Stranger Things, you may be a robot. It
Good
was
to know.
that good.
I can't quite bypass. What all do you have on your keychain? I
Just-
have one key, my car keys.
I have other keys, accoutrements, things that are needed on my keychain, and I just
right.
decided to organize my keychain. It was
Cool.
great. It was a great little
Great.
night.
Also,
One key? How do you have one key?
I mean, I have a house key and my car key. That's it.
That's it?
That's all I got.
Okay.
Yeah, I got
I have
nothing else.
I have more keys. I mean, I'm not a janitor, but I have more keys. I have more keys than that.
I'm picturing like the Office of episode where Jim keeps adding keys to Dwight's.
Oh, good idea.
You know,
no, not that
yeah.
many keys. But
Okay.
I'm really proud of it, and I'm going to show it off to some area dads
All right,
because I think I
cool.
did a pretty good job
Proud of you.
organizing it. Have you watched Stranger Things?
You know, I watched the first 2 seasons and then I got too far behind and never caught up. But yeah,
Prioritize it, Becky.
all right.
You I know you have two. I know you have a family, husband, 2 kids.
Yeah.
But there has to be 5-6 hours a week you can just dedicate to catching up on Stranger Things.
Sure.
It was absolutely fantastic
It's
episode.
a really kid-friendly show too, so we can just have it on while the children are around.
Absolutely. There's nothing to give the kid nightmares at all about that. So no, it was great. Family fun time. I love kids are home. I love hanging out with them. Just an awesome time with family and friends. Football, everything's been going great. Just a great holiday, and really excited to jump into the new year.
Absolutely. Before we hit up a little bit about New Year, want to just kind of look back 2025 on our first show. It was when I announced that I was pregnant with our second bundle of joy. So that was exciting to hear back that sharing of news. And obviously a big year with welcoming baby Walker, and everything has been great. We love him. He is a wild little man. So that's been very great.
It's a good thing you said that you loved him. I mean, I'm glad we got that on the record.
Just a little bit obsessed
He
with
is a
him.
Vikings fan, contrary
You
to
know,
his
we
brother.
try. Yeah, we're claiming that.
Yep.
What about for you? How was your 25?
My 25 had pluses and minuses. I was once in a car with Rudy Boschwitz when I worked on his campaign. He told me the secret to life, Michael. He goes, Michael, the secret to life is to have more ups and downs. life is full of ups and downs, and the secret is to have more ups than downs. I had a pretty rocky year, and so I'm pretty excited for 2025 to be done, and I'm really swinging into 2026. I'm very excited for 2026, but I'm a glass half full guy, and I really want to focus on the positive.
I love
But
that.
there was some tough years aside from the new addition to your family. I don't know that I'm going to report a lot of positive developments in 2025. The fact that we have a new Vikings fan in the state of Minnesota is always a plus. But no, I'm very excited about. I look back, I listen to our old episodes too. I'm a very introspective person, so I analyze, I look, I monitor things, check in, and do a lot of that stuff, and so it's an ongoing kind of project. As many would say, I am a work in progress. And so I spend a lot of time doing that stuff. So I like this time of year in terms of, because I think it platforms a lot of discussion about self-improvement, taking care of yourself, and setting goals. I think setting goals, measurements, and holding yourself accountable to those things are good. And so I love this time of year.
Perfect. And do you have any resolutions or intentions for the new year?
My intention is to get through the year. That's number one. No, yeah. I mean, I focus on, my kids ask me, what would I love in 2026? I want, my family safe, their friends safe. I want everyone that I know, you and your family, to be safe and healthy and strong. Peace on earth, goodwill towards men. I would like to, one of the things that I wanted to really chime in on is I really want to expand more into talking with, let me start over. One of the things that I think really reared its head in a lot of ugly ways in 2025 was the ugliness and the partisanship that exists and the tone that exists. I think we've never been more divided. And so one of the things is, I was sitting down and thinking about the past year, and some of the things that kind of got me was how many times we had to take breaks from what we were planning to discuss based on some really, really tragic and sad things that happened. And I don't want to take away from anyone else's pain and tragedy that they had. But those are the type of things that really got me down. And, you get to the end of the year and you got two options. You can just give up, let the terrorists win, which I refuse to do, or plow ahead. And so I want to what I'm really interested in 2026 is really reaching out and having conversations with people who are very value added, positive, upbeat, people who I don't agree with all the time, but want to have responsible, well-grounded conversations. That is something that is really sticking through with me. And I will say, Becky, and I was talking with my family about this, if I didn't have the podcast, if I didn't have the ability, I don't know where I would be kind of mentally right now, because I do want peace on earth, goodwill towards all to happen, not to be cheesy. And 2025 was a tough year. And so having this podcast, having the opportunity to have discussions, but I think even furthermore, I want to extend it more into just more of my daily interactions and making sure that the sphere of influence and the people that are around me are positive, upbeat, and are people that I think are really interested in investing in the betterment of our state, our society, and everywhere on a whole. Which is sad, because this means this must be our last episode then, because obviously that doesn't apply to you. No, I'm just joking. No, in all seriousness, this is something I'm very interested in 2026, which is really diving in even more and really having some good conversations.
Same. It's crazy to think of how many of these New Year's we've now welcomed on this podcast. And it's exciting to have another one. And I am very grateful for this podcast as well, and to have this outlet, especially, over the last 5 years of stepping away from that hyper partisan role that I played for so long, and moving into kind of this new space, and being able to have some more of these productive, constructive conversations that try to kind of bridge that gap that we're seeing in society. So I hope to continue that as well. And then on a personal level, we're doing this typical trying to move more again. I got a new desk that can be raised up and down, so I can use my walking pad at my desk while I'm
Fantastic.
working. So I'm really excited about doing that more often. And then one thing that maybe we'll see some benefit over on this podcast is a resolution of a woman I saw on TikTok. She has been taking a 60-second video of herself every day I just did it, with forcing herself to not use filler words. And so the the hims and the has, and just kind of even some run-on sentences of and. And that's something I notice, as I listen back, I hear those I hear those little stutters that I make. So I'm going to try it myself to work on not filming myself for anybody's visual or like putting out on TikTok, but working on reducing some of those filler words and trying to be a little bit more smooth and cohesive with my speech and my podcasting. So that's one that I'm going to work on.
That's wonderful to have those goals. I have to say, as someone who edits this podcast, you consistently have the lowest number of filler words.
Oh,
and
well,
so
that is very
I want you just to plow ahead with your goal, but I just will say and I'm doing it right now. You can get that sense. Filler words are a challenge. And so my kudos to you. And also on the health aspect, I am someone who likes to go for walks and do those types of things. So I'm really trying to tackle this. And I just want to say, just as we move on from this subject, how much this podcast is a part of my life and an interest, and also very important to, I think, getting through this difficult time. I think that, and we're going to discuss some of these subjects, but I went back and listened to a lot of our episodes just to check back. I launched a Substack this year. I was not expecting to talk about the subjects that I did. And so having this podcast and doing it and having these conversations and talking to someone who absolutely meets the definition of who I want to talk to and interact with, I think has really been helpful to me. So thank you for doing this again as we kick off a new year. And thanks for everything. Welcome to 2026.
Welcome. And the last things I'm going to say about 2026 is my two big things of the year. My little brother is getting married this summer, so we have that to look forward to. And I turned 40 this year. It's a big year.
Wow.
Ooh, yes. It's a good
Lordy,
realization
Lordy.
of where I
40.
What?
Lordy.
Yeah.
Look who's going to be 40.
We're doing a big 40th celebration. All my a bunch of my college friends are going to head back to Eau Claire to celebrate all of us turning 40. And yeah, I'm excited. We're leaning in, but we're also going to be trying to better ourselves in the realization that we're not 20 anymore and life is moving fast.
Well, early congratulations to your brother and early happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Don't worry, I won't let you forget about it. All right, moving in. We have one topic today. It's fraud. I don't know if it's going to be the theme of 2026, but it is certainly the theme of this episode. So we're going to kick things off. It was there was a big weekend on December 26th. We were all kind of punched in the face by this 42-minute video. YouTube content creator Nick Shirley came to Minnesota and published a big video visiting 10 daycare sites around Minnesota, claiming to have uncovered $110 million in fraud during those visits. This video on YouTube has garnered almost 3 million views, which doesn't include the individual clips and everything that is flying around. But on X, the post where it was published has 237 retweets, 660,000 likes, 42,000 comments, and 135 million impressions. It really just smacked all of us in the face and has kind of carried over for the last week. So kind of want to lean into this, starting by, before we get into all the ins and outs of it, but throwing it to you. Did you watch the whole thing? Initial thoughts, any facts, figures, things you want to hit on to kick things off?
Well, I watched it. I watched it multiple times. First of all, I think I'm a big advocate. I'm going to kind of break this up into sections. So as the person who conducts and drives these episodes, cut me off if I'm rambling or break this up in any way you want. But just to go through it a bit, I'm a big advocate for independent journalists and citizen journalists. And so one of the discussions I think we should have at some point in this episode is the media coverage and what occurred. But what we're seeing right now is a real expansion in fraud coverage in Minnesota. And so having this video go out there and blow the fraud subject up, I think we're going to see more of it. I think we're going to see more of it, and it's going to be interesting how it happens. I wanted to say a couple of things at the onset. First of all, I think that without any hesitation, there is so much fraud in this state that I think that it is impossible to expect the quote unquote mainstream media to cover it all. I just don't think that in order to adequately cover this topic, in order to investigate this topic, I think there's going to need to be a combination of enterprise journalists, independent journalists, investigative journalists that cover all spectrums of the media, kind of media ecosphere, the whole atmosphere of media. I think it's going to be important to do. What I want to just start off by saying a couple of things. As a parent, I don't know how excited I would be for someone to show up to my kid's daycare with a video camera and expect to walk in. And so I want to compliment and say, as someone who considers himself one of the many hats that I wear to cover my bald head, is a citizen journalist, I respect, appreciate, and understand the need, the desire, and how important it is to transparency to have independent journalists and citizens journalists doing the type of work that needs to be done. Many, many stories have been broken by citizen journalists and by average people, not people that don't represent media outlets, media institutions in the traditional sense, breaking stories. But I wanted to, if you could maybe help me, because this is such a massive subject, is I want to start with separating a bit of the fraud from the process a bit, and show, having a 23-year-old young adult show up to a daycare center and expecting to get in and expecting to film, I think is problematic. And there was a theatrical element to him being denied access into the facility. And I guess I want to pivot back to you on this subject. As a parent, your kid is if your kids are in daycare and someone showed up with a video camera, what would the expectation be on your expectation on the facility?
Yeah, I mean, so at our location, you can walk into kind of a little vestibule area, but
25-cent word.
I know it from friends, but and then on both sides there's a window where you can see into the director's office on the left and into the other directors where they kind of welcome. There's like a little sliding pane that they could open, and then the iPads we sign in on. But then to get into the actual school, you have to be buzzed in. There's not a fob, there's not a key card, there's not a pin. You have to be let in by one of the directors of the school. And so somebody trying to film would absolutely be stopped and not let me on there. In fact, we have to sign, one of the many things that we sign for our school is giving permission for the school to or to not use any visuals of our children. And then we also sign a social media policy saying, any of the photos that they send us of our children, if we use them on social media, we have to exclude any other child's face in it. So, I mean, it very clearly, there are a lot of standards in place for that. We have construction going on at our school right now. They've made it very clear their process for that. Even any construction workers are not allowed in through the main door or any access to children or anything of that sort. And these are, obviously construction workers hired to be there. So it certainly would not be let into the school to see or interact with children.
Did you think that his expectation that he was going to get in was, what'd you think about that?
This is where I kind of do waver a little bit. I don't think that he would have been allowed in. I do think his kind of follow-up comments where I've seen him say that he expected there to be a little bit of a lobby or some place that he could enter from outside. I could kind of see, but entering in is obviously not going to happen. So I totally understood that. And then we'll get into it a little bit more. But I think where my main issue that he highlighted is when he asked if he could talk to somebody about enrolling a child in there. And that was rebuffed. Now, again, if he has a big camera, I don't know what the visuals that they were presented with and how that looked. But I could see where he found that problematic.
Yeah, I mean, here's where I think we're at as a state is that, and this is going to be a kind of a swipe at everyone, except for one person. I'm going to take a pretty big swipe here. I did some interviews this past week, spoke to Politico, spoke to the Washington Post about fraud. And my general comments is that the issue of fraud is so massive right now that I think it is difficult for people, just average people, including myself, to comprehend the size and scope of where it's at. It is spreading. The information that we're finding out is massive. My late father was a CPA and a forensic accountant, and I grew up in a household of where I saw my father be inquisitive in his daily life about whether it was tax returns or other types of matters, investigating and looking at where money was spent and how it was spent. And so growing up in a household where I kind of had a rudimentary understanding, or through my dad, understanding of it, I got to say that as Joe Q citizen, as just me, Michael Brodkorb, I think there's only one person in this state who I think has done an effective job of communicating that fraud is a problem and the size and scope of it, and that is Joe Thompson with the U.S. Attorney's Office. I think when he gets out and speaks on this issue, he is a subject matter expert on it, and he approaches the subject with just a raw sobriety and bluntness that I think is incredibly effective at preparing Minnesotans for how deep this fraud goes and how big it is. I don't think there is a politician in this state who I think has adequately wrapped their arms around it enough to, as I said to one of the outlets that I spoke with, this is not like the dam's broken. It's busted open. You can think of it as the dam is broken, or you think of it like it's a wild fire hose and it's just spraying nonstop. The drip is over with. I mean, the dam is open, the floodgates are open, the fire hose is out there running. And what we need, I think, in this state is someone to go out there and adequately convey how we're going to get out of this mess. While that's not being done, what we have is we're going to have a situation where more of this is going to happen. And the concern I have is if I think no one in state government, I think, has conveyed effectively, to quote Alexander Haig, I'm in control here at the White House. I understand what's going on. We're going to see more of this stuff. And there is a part of me that respects and appreciates the work of citizen journalists and enterprising journalists to uncover fraud that every Minnesotan should be concerned about. I think one of the things that we are going to be, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but we are going to talk about fraud aggressively on this podcast, and we are going to take the position, at least I am, and I assume you are, but correct me if I'm wrong, fraud is bad. We're going to platform people who are interested in talking about solutions and how we tackle this. I think it's going to be the marquee issue of 2026. As much as I want that to be a part of the discussion, what I don't want to see is 23-year-old kids showing up to daycare centers expecting to get in, and there being confrontations at daycare facilities. That is something that I don't want to see happen. Who do I hold responsible for that? People in government right now. I don't blame the 23-year-old kid, not one bit. I was an aggressive a blogger at a young age, and there's absolutely no doubt I would have probably pursued very aggressively some of these stories. I would have hoped I would have had the judgment not to walk into a daycare center and expect to film and get in, and then just, I think, make up the fact that he wants to enroll a kid into the daycare facility. But that's the type of stuff, and that's what I'm concerned about. I'm approaching this from the standpoint that I think everyone in government is to blame in some way or another, and also that I want to see the problem solved. And while we should appreciate the fact that an enterprising YouTuber came to this state and exposed some things, I don't know that is a recipe for people like me to say, boy, we're really on top of it. We know what we're doing, and this is the plan we're going to get out of this. Is that fair?
I think that's very fair. I mean, I think I think you laid it out very well, because we're seeing our newsrooms shrink and shrink, and we know they are so much already on their plates. And so to do deep investigative work, especially at something of this scale, just simply isn't in the budget or in the time frame of what they have to do and cover, and they can't just run 30-minute, 42-minute videos on fraud once a week, anything of that sort. I think, one of the things that we run into, and we'll certainly talk about that here, is how everything is partisan, right? I mean, even things that are not fraud, we started the year talking about and praising how glad we were. We talked to Kristen Robbins, the chair of the fraud committee.
Correct.
We talked to other individuals and talking about how this is something Republicans and Democrats are going to try to work together and be behind and tackle together, right? But in this day and age, everything becomes political so quickly based on who likes it, who dislikes it, who supports it, who tweets about it, everything of the like. So it's an interesting spot to be in because I don't know the answer of who can effectively tackle this, who can take this on, because we're seeing, and we'll get into some of the work that the state has done, that obviously Republicans have pounced on, being not enough and not effective enough. We're going to talk about some of the stuff that the federal government's doing that people think are too overreaching and too much and has collateral damage. And so again, it's who do we turn to? I think is a tough spot to be in when we feel like something needs to be done. We feel like there needs to be investigated, but who does it and how it gets done and what happens from it, I think is just so hard to know.
I will do a podcast episode with you every week for the next year about fraud, because I think it's going to be going on. I think that this is going to be an issue that's going to continue to, as I've said before, the appointment of some of these people, Walz pointing in in essence, a fraud czar, more is going to be caught here. And what I also said to Politico and others and the Washington Post was something that you and I specifically discussed, which this isn't going to get better. It's going to get worse before it gets better. I don't think we're at rock bottom. I don't want anyone to confuse my kind of process concerns with a 23-year-old kid walking into a daycare center in any way, shape, or form to be any type of desire to have this whitewashed or to have this brushed under the carpet. I think that I said to some of the media outlets this week that I said, this is not going to be an issue. Whoever gets elected governor, this is going to define their term. I think that this is the issue, not Becky just for this year, but I think it's going to be the issue that whoever is elected governor is the measuring stick is going to be determined is, did they get their arms around this? I don't believe, because of the size and scope of where we're at, that this is going to get cleaned up in a year. I don't think it's going to get cleaned up in 2 years. I think if we were still doing a podcast 4 years from now, when we're talking about as the governor's race in whatever year that would be, 2030 shaping up, that we would be saying to ourselves, did the person who win in 2026, did they clean it up? Because I got to tell you, I don't think we're anywhere near getting to the actual size and scope. I don't think we've hit rock bottom. And that's why I think that this is going to continue to be such a massive issue.
I completely agree. And I think it's not only getting to the bottom of what has occurred, but you have to then pass laws to put new blockades in place and different systems in place and processes to make sure that this does not continue to happen, because this is obviously not just one program, one area, one agency, right? This is widespread. It's all over. We're seeing that these holes exist and folks are taking advantage of it. And so there's a lot of work left to be done, and we'll certainly be covering that as we go.
Can you push back at me a little bit? And I just want to make sure I'm nailing this correctly. That I'm just saying that if as taxpayers, you're sitting at home with your husband, I'm sitting home with my family, we're watching the news, and there's a difference in my head, and push back if you think I'm wrong, between Joe Thompson standing up at a press conference with the authority of the U.S. attorney, the subpoena power, the people that get to go in with the windbreakers on and the jackets with the blue jackets with the yellow writing on the back and other things, and other agencies going in, and a YouTuber looking for clicks. As a Minnesotan who just turned 52, who wants to see our state succeed, I'm more interested at my age in having someone with Joe Thompson's profile and credentials and pedigree, someone who has subpoena power, someone who has authority to walk out with files and do things, rather than a YouTuber. I think the system has failed if that's who we're looking for to be our fact finder of this.
Right.
Is that fair to say?
It is fair to say, and I agree with you on that. I think where there is a separation is what Joe Sixpack feels about it, right?
Yep.
Because I will tell you, if I looked at my social media, my Instagram, my Facebook from folks I went to high school and college and just have activists along the way, when I saw Joe Thompson, others within their high-ranking officials talk about the $9 billion in fraud and all of these different things and the actual scope of investigation and fraud that may exist, versus looking at my social media and Instagram following this, it is girls I knew from college and the bars, and it is, folks I have met along the way showing clips of this time and time again. I mean, my social media feed from non-political folks who, I just have interacted with or become friends with and have followed along the way, this was everywhere.
Absolutely.
And has been for the last week. And so, well, I agree with you, and I want, it to be the high-ranking officials that are hired and experts and have everything at their fingertips to do this. I don't know that the general public is there.
I agree with you.
And so I think that's kind of where things get away from us, right? And I think it will be interesting to see the electoral, the election implication on all of this.
I think that this Nick Shirley video is, do you remember the Oscars a few years ago where Ellen took the photograph and it went everywhere?
Yeah.
I think that I will plant a flag and say that the video taken by Nick Shirley is the most, probably second only to the video that was shot of George Floyd being killed, being murdered, is the most significant kind of citizen journalist type moment and viral moment that I've ever seen. And I think we're going to be talking about this moment years and years to come. And so it shows the power of social media. It shows the power of the enterprise journalism, citizen journalism, and this type of narrative storytelling that I think we're going to see more and more of over the coming weeks and months.
Absolutely agree. I do want to continue our conversation kind of chatting a little bit through what the video itself showed and the reactions we've seen from it. So we watched as Nick and his associate David, who claims to have done a lot of research over the years, they visited about 10 daycare centers throughout the state that appeared to be non-operational. Many of them have received substantial funding, some over $1 million. They claim that there were no children present, many lacking playground equipment, footprints in the snow, no cars in the parking lot, interacted with witnesses on the street or individuals on the street who say they've never seen children present. And then, like we discussed, at multiple locations, he claimed that he had, I think little Joey is what he called, somebody that he wanted to register a child and was often refused. Every time he showed in his video, he was offered no forms, that no one was there to talk to him about it, that nobody seemed interested in helping him potentially enroll his child. Then there was also an angle that we can certainly chat about, where he went into talking about how the new Minnesota flag looks like the Somalia flag. There was a lot of focus on Somali individuals or organizations being led by Somali individuals. Obviously, this is something we've talked about already with President Trump's comments on that. There's some more that we will discuss with other reactions in that area. They highlighted something that's now obviously been very widespread, the Quality Learning Center, a misspelled sign outside of one of the daycare centers, missing the N in learning, which I believe some shirts have already been made, and kind of a poking the fun there. As they drove around, they claimed they were being followed. They had some individuals standing outside saying, "Don't open the doors, it's ICE," and some hostile interacted with some hostile individuals who were screaming, yelling, all of that, which I feel like that then we've turned and heard from some daycare workers and some other community members that they've reportedly gotten harassed, tied to the public reaction and raising concerns. Nick Shirley has claimed that he has gotten death threats. And so we know that these things move fast, and there's a lot of really big responses and reactions from this. Ending with here, some of these places visited were also some of the same locations that Jay Cole from KSTP had covered in last year. We discussed that at the time. But then, of course, this obviously all ends with a criticism of Governor Walz, calling him out for allowing fraud to continue. So there was a whole lot in it. I mean, it was a long video. A lot of clips have been shared. Did anything, while we've already discussed kind of like the general thoughts around it, anything overly surprising or shocking, or anything that you want to point out in particular before we chat through responses?
No, I think that we're going to see more of this. And I think that's the concern. I think you and I, without knowing about this specific center, look, I think, as you described it, one of the things that we do on this podcast is kind of break down our perspectives and kind of the talking class that we're involved with, but also recognize what people outside of the state or people across the state, not in that bubble, think. I was out of state and heard about this. People knowing, literally saying, feeding our future, knowing that level of detail in the scandal. This has broken through. This gentleman's video, again, I think is one of the most defining moments in terms of viral content, and is encapsulated in a very, very tidy way. And there's some questions. I mean, obviously there's some questions about the accuracy and all that stuff. That being said, you cannot argue with the fact that this took off in the reaction that it did. And this is just another example, Becky, I think, of how we're not on top of this. We have a daycare center that it's at all of the kind of trappings of something that doesn't sadly look legitimate when you have the learning spelled wrong and the sign goes up and you have this kind of ongoing discussion. These are the types of things that people are going to look at and kick the tires on. The taxpayers, to the degree which these are funded by the taxpayers, this is legitimate criticism and commentary about fraud. That being said, I don't want to see this turn into a situation where daycare centers are getting overrun, they're getting inundated, there are safety concerns. I've seen a lot of things on social media now, people replicating this type of activity and going in and doing this type of kind of gonzo journalism. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but just kind of getting in there. We have to be careful about that in the sense that, and I talked about that in terms of on some of the ICE raids, people protesting, people getting in the face of ICE agents and law enforcement doing the work that they need to do. This is another example of where I think elected officials not doing more to corral this problem and assure the taxpayers that they have a hold of it is going to lead to more of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It is really concerning, especially when there's so much anger and so many emotions around it from both sides. And
Yep.
We certainly have seen that. And so to your point of how large this has become, we saw Elon Musk amplify it on Twitter. Vice President J.D. Vance praised Shirley's work on X. He even said that Shirley's video has done far more useful journalism than any of the winners of the 2024 Pulitzer Prize. We saw Lisa Damuth talked about how House and their research team helped identify some of the fraud flag sites and demand greater transparency. Representative Walter Hudson, who we will chat about his upcoming participation in a DC hearing that will be next week. He said, what we've seen in the past few days in the wake of the Nick Shirley video is a lot of sensationalism from a lot of different angles in attempts to turn this into a partisan boxing match, when a point of fact, just a few months ago, this was very much a bipartisan issue. And I think it's
right.
Such a fair point there. And then we have Representative Majority Whip Tom Emmer. He called out the can't even spell learning right and, demanding explanations from Governor Walz. And then he tweeted a couple days after that, breaking, I am calling for the denaturalization and deportation of every Somali engaged in fraud in Minnesota. And then has a full statement talking about if they're here illegally, deportment, if they're naturalized citizens, revoke their citizenship, that he is willing to change laws to do that. If you break our laws and participate in this fraud, you should not be here. So there's a whole lot at our state legislature is covering it. Our Republicans across the state, statewide office, we obviously saw a lot from candidates for governor and Congress and the vice president and the president. And we'll chat a little bit through the Trump administration and their reaction and response here in a minute. Anything that you hope to see or that surprised you that you did see from any Republicans on this?
Well, I meant to say this earlier, but when I first, and on Scout's honor, when I first saw the video, I thought about you in the sense of this. One of the best points you made on this podcast ever, but certainly last year, was the fact you talked about storytelling, how important it is for narrative storytelling. And then it's really stuck into my brain. And it has really reframed my thinking. And it was a really profound statement you made. What Shirley did, was tell a story through and used, it wasn't him just in front of a camera talking and giving a canned speech. He was telling a story. In that 42-minute video that got those views, it shows the power of narrative storytelling and how it is for Republicans to break through. The numbers that you discussed, and I've heard about the raw numbers of the likes and retweets and mentions, but also fascinated by how you said it broke through and kind of, I would say, kind of your non-traditional kind of circle that you travel with and see. This is broken through, and I think that this is going to be an all hands on deck approach. I think Representative Hudson is correct about this being this started off as a bipartisan issue. I think about the way you and I have discussed this. Becky, I think that this is the issue that we will probably have talked the most about when all is said and done. And we have complimented from the beginning Republicans' approach at the legislature, but also recognizing we've had some Democrats on to talk about fraud and solutions and answers to this. And so I think that Representative Hudson is right in saying that just a few months ago, this was a very bipartisan issue. What I would say is, I think the reality is, I think most Minnesotans, and push back if you think I'm wrong, are not going to get caught up in how this video was taken, who gave it to them, or what it was done. What they're going to remember is there was a daycare center that had a misspelled sign, and there is the potential for some fraud going on in there. And Minnesotans are tired of it. That's the message. And I think whoever can galvanize support around that visual, that story that he told, which is exactly the type of narrative storytelling you have discussed that Republicans need to do, that's going to be the recipe for someone in 2026.
I agree. And I think kind of chatting through that angle, because I want to, of course, hit on what the Democrats' reaction and response is I think when we look at the Democrats and the bipartisan side of things, I think now, I have so much I want to say, but I don't know how to get it out yet. I think it's going to be a hard go at it because Governor Walz is running for a third term. I don't see that changing, which I'm interested in if you think that any of this will force him out of the race, but I don't see that changing. And so Democrats, because of how they've done, and you know, they always have done a very good job at being a cohesive party in the public, they're kind of in a tricky spot to be in to want to be vocal at calling things out while also not disrespecting the hierarchy and their, sitting governor and gubernatorial candidate. And so I want to have further conversations about that because I think it's a tough spot for them to be in when we know it is a bipartisan issue, but how they message that and come out with that without how to walk that line is going to be a really, really tricky thing for Democrats, I think, going through this legislative session and up until the 2026 election.
Now, I agree with your perspective. I agree that it's tough, but really should it be? I mean, is this not an issue where Democrats should be able to come out and say, we're against it. I mean, isn't it just I think that, as the resident homeless Republican and someone who is criticized for criticizing Republicans to the degree which I have, I think this is a big softball over the plate that they need to swing at. And I think Democrats not chiming in and messaging on it and tiptoeing around it a bit, I think may cost them. I think that it may cost them. We had Senator Heather Gustafson on talking about the Inspector General position. I stand by, which was, I think, a point we both had, which is that would have been the best position to have. That would have been the good legislative compromise. But regarding the governor, I think he stays in the race, but he has not had a good month.
No.
He has not had a good month. And I think that I stand by my position that I don't think on the issue of fraud, it's going to get better.
Right. I agree with you. I don't think it should be a hard thing to come out against. I think what's hard is that Governor Walz, the flag he has staked in the ground is that we've been doing the work. We've been on top of this, trying to root out fraud and hold people accountable. And so Democrats saying, we need to address this issue, it's a massive problem, are going to come back with, but you guys were in the majority and Governor Walz has been on top of this. So has he not been on the top of this? Because he's been the governor for the last 8 years. And so I think the initial tweet or whatever they want to say, I think is the easy part. Any follow-up, I think can get them into a tricky spot with how they answer.
If you were advising Democrats, which people may think you do, if you were advising Democrats, what would you tell them to say?
Behind closed doors, Governor Walz, get out of there. I think absolutely there's an internal push to get Governor Walz not to run for a third term, because this is going to be all that is talked about. And it is a really tough thing for them to navigate. And it's a really, it's a potential landmine for so many of them, of how they answer. If I were there, I would just kind of pivot back to, I voted on the House floor or the Senate floor to appoint or elect an inspector general, like pointing back to what you're doing in the House and the Senate and what votes you're taking to make those changes. And, you could say, well, Governor Walz, see, I don't want to, this is where I'm going to get myself into trouble. I think you look forward, you be forward thinking. If I was a candidate, I would want to be forward looking. I'm taking the votes to make sure, the people are in place to root this out, to solve what's been going on. I'm going to sit here and try to figure out how we fix it and what blockades and guardrails we put up to make sure that it doesn't happen again.
Do you think that this is a situation where, in the interest of getting on top of the fraud issue, he shouldn't run?
Yeah. I think it's going to be really tricky for Democrats with him continuing to run. But I don't see that changing. I think he runs.
So the reason I ask is because I think you're one of the things I think that you do a much better job of me doing overall is explaining comms strategy. You're smarter at it than I am, but also just the points of it and what you've laid out and how you would advise on it. I think this is getting out of control. Now, some would say it's already out of control, but if you think about what we've discussed, and so I went back and listened to some of our past episodes over the break here about fraud in a couple of our last episodes, and you had discussed how easy it is, not how easy it is, but how customary it is in administrations to just fire someone, to throw someone overboard. That hasn't been done. The only accountability that's happened has been because of the United States Attorney's Office. And I think that is going to be a central issue, a very substantive issue. I think that most Minnesotans are going to fall in. I think some of the demographic that you're talking about, the average voter, not as tuned in as you and I are and other people are, that you were discussing on this issue, and you were seeing some of their posts and stuff. I think the expectation is going to be very easy. This much fraud, someone needs to be fired for it. And I think Republicans have an opportunity to talk about the lack of accountability. It's one thing for someone to say, the buck stops with me. But the only way that you can land that answer is if people believe you. So it's one thing for someone to say the buck stops with me and I'm responsible. The question is, do people believe you on that?
Right.
And I have my doubts right now as to whether Minnesotans believe that the governor accepts accountability for what occurred. He said the words, but does he accept accountability for it? And how does he show that with some of his actions? I don't think it is by gaslighting people.
Yeah.
I don't think it is by gaslighting people and saying, we've been on top of this from the beginning. I don't believe it's gaslighting. Go ahead.
I do want to go into how the governor responded to this. So again, this video came out on December 26th. On social media, we didn't see anything from Governor Walz, either his official or his campaign Twitter account, until the 30th. So 4 full days. I think they thought maybe it would go away. It very clearly only gained momentum and gained speed. I want to also, before I quote some of this stuff, commend the Republicans here in the state and nationally, because we are a week past and it is still everywhere. And so to get something in this day and age that stays at the top of news stories, newscasts, everything over the holidays when people are really interested and, paying attention for 7+ days is insane in this day and age. And so very clearly they needed to respond. The governor's office went on to try to defend his record, stating that they are working on it. They've spent years cracking down on fraud, implemented reforms, supported prosecutions. They emphasized some of the investigations predate the video and that state licensing checks are already ongoing, disputing claims that this is new proof. And then they go into our favorite thing, blame Trump. When in doubt, blame Trump. Governor called it, said it was a partisan attack. He said, quote, "This is Trump's long game. We've spent years cracking down on fraudsters. It's a serious issue, but this has been his plan all along. He's politicizing the issue to defund programs that help Minnesotans." Now,
swing away.
Blaming Trump has never worked. We saw that this is one of their major failures of why President Trump got elected in 2024. And all of the failures along the way is it doesn't work. It's just, whether you love him or hate him, it doesn't work. Also, how can are you trying to imply that President Trump is the one who started this fraud 6 years ago when he wasn't president? 4 years ago? The fraud was existing. The fraud has been existing. That's not President Trump's fault. Leader Niska said, "Your failure is not Trump's fault. Give the Trump deflection strategy a rest already and take responsibility." And that to me was just like, I get where you're trying to go, because obviously the just saying, I'm doing the work, I'm responsible, we've got it handled isn't working. So you want your folks to back you up and be fired up as well. But it's so silly. It literally made me laugh.
Blaming Trump for fraud is as credible as me blaming Trump for me getting locked in the shower on Christmas Day. This is where I think there's a bit of gaslighting. And I say that as someone who has been critical of Donald Trump. I've never voted for him. But the reality is that the federal government is doing a lot right now to police and clean up a mess that any fair analysis will show started in this administration. And I say that as someone who, I supported Walz in 2022. I supported him when he ran for vice president. But the truth of the matter is you have to, and I think that's where the credibility gap is coming in terms of the statement. If I locked myself in the shower, I didn't blame anybody else. And that's where the statement ends. I did that. And so if you accept responsibility for it, and if the buck stops with me, you know what you have to do then? You can't let the buck go to other places. The buck has to stop with you. You have to be accountable. And this is where I think we have gotten to such a ridiculous point in politics, is that one of two things. It is people don't accept responsibility to the level which they should. And number two, they are so too willing to blame, just for partisan reasons, the other side for things. It's just not credible. And I say that as someone who A, wants this problem to get better, B, has never voted for Donald Trump, and as someone who supported Walz when he ran for re-election and when he was Kamala Harris's VP pick. This fraud problem was not created by Donald Trump. And the opportunity that exists in the governor's race in 2026 is for a leader in this state to just clean it up. How many times as parents have I said to my kids, I don't care how the mess started, let's just clean it up. A lot of people have said to me, Michael, I don't care how you made the problem, just clean it up. Okay. That's the way it works. And so what I think is happening here is this, it's a great excuse. It is a great excuse to just be able to say, that's Donald Trump's fault. It's not. There are things that, and we, Becky, I think have been very fair about discussing criticisms that we have with Donald Trump, but also saying reasonably and fairly when there's opportunities for things that they're doing right. The federal government is stepping in because the state of Minnesota has not shown an ability to wrap their arms and get a hold of the issue as fraud. And that is the reality of the problem. And if it was not for the federal government, I don't believe we would have 1/10 of the accountability that we've had so far.
Yes. And now I know would never happen, but could you imagine if his response was simply, we have like the same response of, we have worked hard, we've been addressing this, we've been making sure we catch the fraudsters and hold them accountable, and we look forward to the additional help and investigation of the federal government to help us ensure that this fraud is stopped, their taxpayer dollars are spent accordingly, and that it doesn't happen again.
You just made an in-kind contribution.
It takes the
to the
wind
DFL.
out of the same sails. It would never happen. I understand that.
But your message is perfect, Becky. That's exactly, and that would...
If you truly care about this, don't you want everybody's help, everybody's resources? Come on, let's work together. I'm going to turn things over. But we know that's not the case because DHS they're not working together. They want to block things. They don't want to do this. But it should be that simple.
It doesn't matter to me which side cleans it up as long as it gets cleaned up.
Right.
And I think your messaging point is spot on. Imagine that would go over. I mean, what you just said was perfect. That's exactly the message that someone should have.
And you get that middle of the road person to say, thank you. I don't like President Trump. I don't like Governor Tim Walz. But I care about my taxpayer dollars how they're being spent or not spent and misused. And so work together. Kumbaya. Hug it out. Let's figure this crap out.
Here's the thing about that statement is that I think Walz would benefit from that statement.
I do too.
If he could go out there and say, I applaud the work of I want to read. I mean, fraud is an issue. The message is clear. I've received it. We're gonna partner with any agency that we can at state, local level, the state, federal, and local level to ensure that every taxpayer dollar is spent in an appropriate way, and that anyone who steals any taxpayer resources is held accountable, and we're being good stewards of the taxpayers. Mm-hmm. And partnering in that way, that's the way this problem gets solved.
Right.
But it's just so sad that that's what we can't get. And I don't want to live, I'm not being naive and saying that it's, just, look, I have one of the other narrative points that I have said is that the reason why Minnesota, I said in some interviews, is the reason why Minnesota is getting so much attention right now is because of Walz's rise in national circles. And that's a plus and a minus. And just wonder where we would be right now on the issue of fraud if there wasn't a U.S. attorney that we had, if we didn't have the work that was being done. Now, Andy Lugar, who was there under Biden, said a lot of things and focused a lot on this. But if you look at some of the other infrastructure that has come in on the federal government that's responsibly and reasonably tightening the screws a bit on payments and reimbursements, that's a reasonable approach. That is an absolutely reasonable approach. And the governor should be applauding those efforts and complimenting his partnerships with state, local, and federal leadership to get this done, because that's what I want the government to do. Think of this. Let's use my analogy for a second of the dam breaking. We have a flood that's taken over the state. I would want the governor to work with FEMA and other agencies to ensure that we have all of the necessary resources to battle the floods and deal with the aftermath of that. I do not want the governor to pick a fight with the federal government and maybe prevent us getting a helicopter or medical needs or getting the type of crisis response team that's with. That is exactly what's happening right now. And when we're spitting in the eye of potential partners, and it's happening on both sides.
Right.
The rhetoric is high. Who gets lost in it is people in the state of Minnesota. And that's what I feel sad about.
Yeah, absolutely. We also...
One last point can I make?
Sure.
Which is, I don't think either of us are naive enough to say politics doesn't have a role in this. I think politics is partisanship and politics are involved in everything. Okay, as Gordon Gekko said, greed, for lack of a better word, works. Politics and partisanship works sometimes. That is the system we have, and so I don't expect President Trump or Governor Walz to not recognize that one is a Democrat, one is a Republican. But at the bottom line, solving the problem. As Representative Hudson said, fraud is a bipartisan issue. This is I understand that it doesn't have the visuals of the type of national disaster that happens in the aftermath of a storm, a flood, a blizzard, or whatever that hits Minnesota. But that type of crisis response is exactly what's needed. And we expect partisanship to be a part of it. We're all adults, grow up, and let's get it solved.
Exactly. And I think one of the things that, in addition to how that would benefit Walz now, I think about in 9 months when we're right before the election, for him to be able to say, I rose above it. I don't agree with President Trump and the language he used, but I wanted to make sure that your taxpayer dollars are being spent and going to help the most vulnerable, our children, our infrastructure, and being spent in a way that you deserve. I did that. I let them come in and do, to take ownership of that as being the helper, of being the one that is going to bring us all together and use those resources. And you still have opportunity, obviously, to slam Trump for his Somali comments and to slam Trump for whatever it might be. But it just, I'm not surprised, but I'm surprised that there's not some more of that going on here.
Brilliant.
I also think, what?
Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll take that any day. We also saw a lot of the DFL and new DFL chair, Carlbaum, trying to point to this as a conspiracy theorist. And he tweeted yesterday, how much money did Lisa Damas spend on supporting a YouTube conspiracy theorist? Now, this comes just days after they did a Star Tribune article bragging about their work with influencers and trying to it was a Governor Walz Democrats tap influencers to spread political message. So it cracks me up a little bit. And also just the angle of saying that Lisa Damas wasted taxpayer dollars to potentially give some research that's found on open public sites to this YouTuber. Even if that were maybe true, would it rise to $225 million or $9 billion? I don't think so. I just think it's a really weak argument to be making. Representative Hudson had tweeted, called this out, saying that the DFL is just stoking division. They attacked Shirley, then tried to use Shirley to attack Dameth and divide the GOP. I think they're just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what hits. And the ratio on that tweet certainly did not show that was a winning message for them.
The job of messaging on this side is to do what I do a lot in life, which is assess a situation and assign blame in a lot of situations. And that's what they're attempting to do. That is the job of the DFL. In this particular situation is to distract, come up with issues in which to discuss. I just don't know that the journalistic history of Nick Shirley is really going to get a lot of attention. It may feel good for some people who are upset as to what he did to go out there and talk about it. Again, I approach it from the standpoint that I would much rather have someone with a blue windbreaker and yellow letters on the back going to these agencies and hauling out records and shutting them down. And I wish there was more of that presence on the ground, policing these types of things, conducting in-spots interviews, doing those types of things to ensure that in a responsible, thoughtful, and productive way, we're getting to the bottom of the fraud that's going on. And so we're not seeing citizen journalists, YouTubers driving around and having these types of confrontations that could lead to situations. But the bottom line, the work needs to be done. And as a taxpayer, I think I would say I'm starting to get to the point where I think a lot of people are at and will be is just stop it, damn it. just get a hold of it. And the fact that that this kid, 23, but this person created this type of viral moment and a really flipped is something that is just astounding.
Yeah.
And we're going to be talking about it for years.
I do want to spend the bulk of our remaining time on Trump administration in D.C., but I want to mention here the Minnesota Department of Children, Youth, and Families did respond by saying that they had visited these 10 facilities featured in the last 6 months unannounced, that they are going to be reviewing each site again. They say they have 55 open investigations related to Child Care Assistance Program. The Minnesota Senate Republican Caucus did send a letter to them on the 29th with a whole flurry of requests for specifics and evidence of those site visits, of how it works, a broader audit of it all, and kind of some more information on how this all has worked and what they sort of information they have gathered. They also asked for a public response by Friday, January 2nd, today, detailing the steps being taken to address these issues along with any preliminary findings. So again, this is going to be something that obviously I would imagine trickles into the next coming weeks. But there is some talk, like you mentioned, that the video's methodology is questionable, whether it was happened outside of visit hours, whether they would even be allowed in if they, set something up. There's children. It's not open to the public for safety of the children and the like. So people are going to continue to criticize that. We'll continue to talk about some of that stuff that arises. But now I want to kind of chat about what we're seeing from the federal government. So we do know the FBI director, Kash Patel, has publicly acknowledged this, that they're already kind of in the works for working to identify and dismantle some of this widespread fraud. Then we had a big move by the Department of Health and Human Services at the federal level. They temporarily froze federal child care payments to Minnesota, citing concerns. This targets roughly $185 million in annual federal funds Minnesota receives. They said, we have turned off the money spigot and we are finding fraud. Funds will be released only when states prove that they are being spent legitimately, and went on to say that they are going to need, before payments are released, states or providers must produce receipts, pictures, attendance records, or other proof that the money is being used legitimately. They did tweet on Monday of this week, on the 28th or 29th, that they are going door to door to suspected fraud sites. We haven't heard a lot more of that, so I expect to. And then real quick, I saw a tweet that you posted, and I think one angle of this I do want to address just briefly is some of the collateral damage to legitimate recipients. You posted a story from a news source where there was an individual who is a quadriplegic who receives funding for her care, and said that if this funding does not come, her workers obviously have to pay their bills as well, are going to have to find other work. And that is going to impact her and her daily life. She is able to live alone. She's able to provide by herself, but there is so much that she is not able to do, to get out of bed, to move around and do the things that she needs to do. And her life, a legitimate recipient of some of this funding, is going to be impacted by this. Anything you want to chat about a little bit on that? Because there's certainly, while we know there is a whole plethora of fraud, there obviously are legitimate recipients, both individuals, organizations, daycare centers, autism centers, home health centers, that are being impacted by their funding being pulled.
Becky, Minnesota is a generous state, and I like the fact that Minnesota is a generous state. We benefit from Minnesota being a generous state and looking out for people. But the system is broken right now. And I feel for every person who is a part of that safety net, who is a part of those generous services that we have as a state, and who is doing everything right and is getting caught up in a system that is broken right now. And I feel for those people. I'm not trying to make light of it in any type of way, but the system is broken. And at some point, there needs to be the system has to change. There has to be a way. I keep going back to all of our previous episodes and what you've talked about, and having that foundation of those conversations, this narrative storytelling, Nick Shirley's video, and also what you said in this episode about all the people that you're hearing talk about this. I guarantee you those people, a good percentage of them are just like me, who recognize that our state has generous benefits, wants there to be a safety net for people, but we have come to the conclusion that the system is broken and that there are not responsible actors in place right now to get it solved. And there are levers inside the bureaucracy of government that can be pulled to ensure better oversight. And they are starting to be pulled. I do not believe they are being pulled in haste to make this pain greater, but it is warranted and justified. And I think it's important, but this is the sad reality. Who is responsible for this are the people who have not taken this fraud issue more responsibly.
I want to chat about that storytelling because I do think we are going to hear more of these stories. And I'm curious from your perspective, because while we don't, the politics of politics and politicizing tragedy is something that sometimes feels icky, but is a necessary storytelling part of why we legislate and why we do what we do. So I anticipate that we will see ads and mailers and the like highlighting some of these stories, some of these individuals whose children were impacted, whose selves were impacted, whose neighbors, and all of the impacts of on life. If you were a betting man, do you think those stories come back to fall on Trump or come back to fall on Trump/Republicans because of the funding? I think I can see both ways. I think that both groups will find people to take advantage, not to take advantage of people, but will utilize stories from people. I think Democrats and Republicans will utilize this to their advantage to aim targets at the others. Just curious of which one you think lands better.
Great question. I think that there are people out there, again, if Donald Trump cured cancer, there are people that would complain about it. I think if Tim Walz cured cancer, there would be people that would complain about it. So I think that setting those aside, I really struggle, and I am straining my brain as someone who has not voted for Trump, who has not supported him. I have a very difficult time finding a way to blame him for what's going on right now. Now, do I think there is a large segment of the population in Minnesota that would love to blame Trump for anything? Absolutely, I do. I think it's one of the electoral problems that I want to discuss about this later in this episode. We'll get to, but it's one of the problems. Trump is a very easy person to blame things on, and that motivates and energizes a particular side. I think it's a very good question. The answer is it probably will impact some people because I think sadly there are a lot of people out there that are polarized in both sides, that no matter what the other side did, they'll find a way to blame. But do I think it's a credible claim? No, I honestly don't. I welcome a resource. My DMs are open, and if you have my phone number, send it to me. If there is a credible article that someone can lay out to me as to why we're in this fraud problem because of Donald Trump, I guarantee I'll read it right away tonight. But
Same.
I just don't think that's a credible argument.
Yeah.
And so but we've seen in politics, Becky, where campaigns are run in a way that really stretch the credibility to the point where the rubber band breaks. And I fully expect them to do that. I just don't know how credible it is.
I mean, I think of it in my mind, it kind of is like an investor in the restaurant, and the general manager is the one that's misusing the investment. You don't go back, the workers, the customers, the consumers don't go back to the person who wrote the check and said, you effed up.
But
right? I mean,
you gave some great advice about what Democrats say. Let me flip your question back to you. If you were doing narrative storytelling and cutting an ad for Republicans to talk about fraud, how would you cut that ad?
I would say this family, their child was not able to receive services that they need at their autism center because Governor Walz let fraud exist. That this family had to keep their children home and lost out on job opportunities because Governor Walz and Keith Ellison let fraud exist. That this individual was not able to care for themselves and their quality of life. They were forced to stay home, stay in bed, stay immobile because of Governor Walz and Keith Ellison letting fraud exist. I would literally have those stories, have those individuals, have those visuals of the true real losses, the quality of life, the income loss, the education or services and trainings and occupational therapy and autism help at these autism centers and all of these different things. I mean, we're talking, I don't want to get emotional, but my son goes to, does some occupational therapy and the like, and the advances that we've seen in him because of his work there. To think of some of these children who are going to be, even if it's just for a month or a couple months or a year, not get the help that their insurance says that they can get, that their doctors say they should get, to think of what they potentially lose out on and what their family potentially loses out on. I mean, it is real stories and real people's lives being impacted here. But I'm with you. It is not something now. I'll say where I think people can blame Trump in a minute, but this is something that I will and continue to do, and I think Republicans have and will continue to effectively place this at the feet of Governor Tim Walz. And I think it's going to be a really, really tough thing for him to turn away from. I think he's going to try. I think we saw that in the op-ed that he posted again. I called it BS on our last episode. He posted it again on December 30th as part of the response to this of how he's working and fixing it. I don't think it's enough. I don't think explaining his way out of this, of we've been really effective in doing this, is factual nor is going to assist him. I think they need to find a different strategy, but I don't know what that is going to be or what that is going to look like. I have to imagine they're having lots of conversations about it, though.
I think that this is going to be an election where we see, depending on who the Republican nominee is for governor and some of these other places, we could see a lot of surrogate speeches, surrogate videos, where people are talking about things. I don't know to what degree looking in the camera for some of these candidates and saying, this is what I did, is going to work. I think they're going to need to rely on what you so profoundly discussed and explained to me, which was that narrative storytelling, because I think that there's a lot of stories that are going to have to be told this next election cycle.
I do think, and I will reiterate one thing that we talked about last time, is I think where Republicans have the potential to lose, and again, this is from my perspective, this is where, because of how my views and my personal opinion lies, is focusing on the Somali aspect of it. Is there some existence there? We have seen a number of individuals who have been charged and convicted in feeding our future that, sure, indeed are Somali individuals. I think that's where things get messy, and I think that's where things are going to turn off some voters, is if there's a lot of this racism or white supremacy or whatever Walz had called it at one point, and we see some of the language. That's where I think Republicans have the potential to stumble over their own feet a little bit. I, again, encourage folks to stay boring and to focus on the stories and to focus on the facts and to focus on the amount of dollars being wasted and families being impacted and all of that sort of thing, because I don't think it's boring. I think it's really important. But I think that leaning out of kind of some of that sensationalized stuff that gets the clicks and gets the face views and that sort of thing is not, it will win your Republican voters who are already going to be voting for you in the first place. This is a race for those midterm voters who we are both fighting over, and I just don't know. I feel like that's a stumbling block that we could potentially see.
I couldn't agree with you more. It helped shape your analysis on that exact point, helped shape some of my comments that I've said to media folks, which is when you have the president come in and say things like garbage, and that really brings kind of a flamethrower to the whole debate, because I think that there is a legitimate policy discussion that needs to happen about immigration and about fraud and where it goes. And when we're using incendiary language like that, it reframes, it prevents that debate from happening.
Here's what I want. It turns off the ears of so many people instantly.
There have been times in our government where presidents have declared the war on this, war on drugs, war on poverty. The candidate that declares a war on fraud, that comes out there and stands there in that arena and comes out and says, I'm going to tackle this. We're going to root this out. We're going to be that generous state. We're going to look out for people. We're going to have the strong social services and safety net that we have in the state, but simultaneously we're going to have a war on poverty. A war on fraud, so we can tackle it in that. That's the type of language I think Minnesotans are ready for. Someone just standing up and saying, this is a problem, and I'm going to fix it, and this is how you're going to judge my time in office and using that kind of language, I think would be so powerful, and that's where I think is the opportunity for both Republicans and Democrats right now.
Absolutely. Before we close out, last thing I wanted to mention is that next week we chatted briefly. There is going to be a House Oversight Committee hearing in Washington, D.C. on January 7th to investigate the massive fraud scandal plaguing Minnesota. Chairman James Comer announced that his goal is to expose failures, identify solutions, and deliver accountability for alleged misuse of federal funds. So far, we're hearing that 3 Minnesota legislators who serve on the Minnesota House Fraud Committee, Representative Walter Hudson, Representative Marion Rarick, and Representative Kristen Robbins, who is the chair of that committee, also running for governor, have been invited to testify. They also invited Governor Walz and Attorney General Ellison to testify at a second hearing on February 10th. They have already also, Comer and his committee leadership have said that they've requested documents, communication, and internal records from Walz and Ellison as part of the investigation, signaling potential bipartisan pressure if compliance is not met. So that's very interesting. But I just want to say one last quote from the press release announcing this hearing. Comer wrote, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Attorney General Keith Ellison have either been asleep at the wheel or complicit in massive fraud involving taxpayer dollars in Minnesota's social services program. Pretty profound, and Democrats are obviously going to try to discount this committee hearing, but I think it's going to be one to watch.
Well, a couple of things I want to say. First of all, we've had all of those people on our podcast.
Sure have.
And I'm excited. I mean, I love a good congressional hearing. I grew up in the Iran-Contra days. And I remember sitting at home watching those. I do have the Watergate hearings on both VHS and DVD at my house, which I will occasionally watch. But that being said, this is going to be a very fascinating hearing. And I think having had those members on, and also, look, we've discussed kind of the political theater of this stuff. But the reality is, I think people are signing up for that now. And the bottom line is, this is to see members of the Minnesota House of Representatives going out to Washington, D.C. and talk about this. I think this has broken through in a very, very substantive way. And this is going to be interesting. If you were Walz or Ellison, would you go?
I don't know. I mean, I would love them to go. I guess here's the deal. I could see them going because they could just then lean into it's political theater. Look how disrespectful they were. Look at what they did. They spent all of this taxpayer dollars on this ridiculous hearing when we're already doing the work back home. But it's also like, is it kind of like testifying in your own defense? Like, it's usually not recommended.
Well, as the legal analyst for the Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, yes, you do have a right to not testify in your defense, and you have a right to plead the fifth. But
do you think they go?
Politically, do you think since this episode is turning into Becky gives advice to the DFL and Republicans, which would be a great episode, would be a great name of the show. Would you advise them to go?
You know, I'm really, really torn on this because I can see both angles. On the 10th, you put together some really great reading to children and then going and serving at a homeless shelter and then, making beds for elderly patients and then like this huge...
You're so good at this. Oh my God.
Huge escapade
it's 2:45 on a Friday
right?
and a holiday break, and you just pulled that out. You are a magician.
I've been home with my children for 10 days straight.
You are a magician.
I've got some
my
extra.
Goodness.
I would pull something like that out and say, listen, y'all criticized me last time when I prepared for a congressional hearing and had to use money. I decided instead to not use $150,000 or $200,000 taxpayer dollars to prepare for another circus where we know President Trump is just going to, have his talking points given down to the committee to rake me through the coals when we're already doing the whole work here at home. So no. However, I could also see him going and watching this and sitting there and taking it and saying, y'all have other better things to do. Do your other things. There's other things that you need to focus on here in Washington, D.C., in your roles in Congress. Again, I am doing the work back home. And if he wants to stay on that line. I personally, if I was on his campaign, I would say do a really great optic day and have that comparison. So when you get a TV camera showing you doing this good stuff and, side by side with circus out in DC, which I think is a warranted circus, but
okay.
What would you say? Do you think they go?
Yes.
You do?
And I think they go. I think they have a responsibility to go. I
Love
think they
it.
have a responsibility to go. I think that
I think it's very optimistic of you. I like it.
if the buck stops with me, as people have said, then the buck stops with me. I think that I'm not saying it will necessarily be productive, but if as the putting on my comms opposition research hat, one of the best visuals that you look for is an empty seat. And if they don't show, there will be an empty seat. There will
With his
be
nameplate, they'll
with his
obviously put it there.
nameplate, and there will people talking as you were y'all and saying things, and it will not be good. I honestly believe that they have no choice but to go, and that is the responsibility of serving in office, is that fair or unfair, right or wrong. If you're going to go out there and say that the buck stops with you, you have a responsibility to go out there and take that heat. We live in very partisan times, Becky, but they signed up for this. They signed up to have election certificates and run for office. And the governor of this state his plan was to be occupying the office of the vice presidency right now. And so I think that going out there and taking the tough questions and answering it and facing the heat is a smart political move. I would also say to you, other reason why I think it would be smart for him to do it is because of what you said about partnering and working with the federal government. One situation, by him going out there, does it make it more or less of a circus? It probably makes it more of a circus. Even though I'm thinking of the Mr. Smith, I always kind of think of government in the days of Mr. Smith goes to Washington and thinking of the best, while simultaneously thinking of Ken Brockman's statement, which is, I've said it before and I'll say it again, democracy simply doesn't work. So I fully accept the political theater that's going to go out there. I think that he's got a responsibility to go, to answer questions, to accept the premise of the bit, which that it's theater, and to go out there and make the case. Do I think any minds are going to be changed by what happens? No. I will say to you this, though. I do think that the members of the fraud committee that are going out there have a real opportunity that I don't see how it works out not in their favor. That is the platforming of legislative work that we've been complimentary of just when it was formed. And so the fact that they're getting recognition from government and being dispatched out there, I think is absolutely significant. I think Walz signed up to be the governor of the state and Ellison the attorney general. Independent of my partisan politics and which hat I'm wearing, I think he's got a responsibility to go out there as a governor and address it. And if he doesn't, I think it's a mistake. Politically and professionally, and I think it'll be a mistake if he doesn't go.
Last question for you. I was a little surprised. I guess if he were focusing on the job, I understand it, but we haven't heard or seen anything from Ken Martin, former chair of the Minnesota DFL for a very long time, now chair of the DNC. Are you surprised, or is that probably for the best for his job to just stay above the fray here?
Probably stay above the fray. You want to know who else we haven't heard a lot from? Is the lieutenant governor, and which is also noteworthy to me. She's running for the United States Senate. And I think it's a subject, I think I'd like to do more of a Senate episode, maybe one of our next episodes, and talk about that more. But boy, oh boy, do I think that electoral demographics aside that help the Democrats, asking for a promotion at this time after.
She wants to stay as far away from fraud as possible because she's technically complicit, right?
Yes, and wants, in fact, access to a bigger checkbook, which is the federal government's checkbook to spend things, I think is pretty rich. And so, yes, I think I'm always surprised when loud voices are suddenly quiet. Yes. And so your observation is well
Very
noted.
good point. Whew. We just have a few things to say on the topic.
We should just note from a programming note that we're going to record an episode. We're going to let that hearing happen, and we're going to do a recap of that hearing next week because I think that's going to be gangbusters.
So we started the episode talking about 2026 looking forward and 2025 looking back. We saw many outlets do years in review, but in one in particular that was noteworthy was the Star Tribune. They did a year in review. They looked back on notable news stories that happened in Minnesota, that happened in the country, the Annunciation school shooting, the president disparaging Somali communities here in Minnesota. You know what was left out? Fraud. The fraud problem that we have talked about almost every episode for this entire year, that has dominated the news cycles, that has dominated the legislature, has dominated the campaign trail. They let it out. They left it out. They didn't mention it.
That is not surprising.
It's not, is it?
Let me just speak that for a second. I spent in years and years and years ago, more than a decade ago, almost 20 years ago, I was an active blogger, an independent journalist. I broke a number of stories that the reason I broke them was because there was a void in, I think, in the media ecosystem in Minnesota. And Minnesota has a rich tradition of independent journalists, bloggers, and other things filling those voids. Part of the reason that has happened is because of, and I'm very sensitive about playing the media bias card. I'm very sensitive about that. But it is very fair to look back at some of the coverage, particularly of fraud, and have said, has there been enough? Do I think that there has been more than what some of the critics want to say? Yes, absolutely. But there is a need for media outlets to be introspective and to look at their coverage and see what they are reporting, and are they reporting it fairly and fully. Where bias, I think, comes from is intensity to cover the subject, not necessarily the coverage. And so I think it is incumbent upon the media, and there's been a lot of great reporters that have done some things. Lou Raguse is one of them, who has done a great job of going out there and is embracing new media. And there's been a variety of reporters, and with the Star Tribune and other outlets across the state that have covered. There is more than enough fraud in this state for news outlets to cover it extensively. But there is, to go back to and close out this subject on the point that you made, this is breaking through in a new way. And it's breaking through in a new way because there are citizen journalists and enterprise journalists broaching and getting into these subjects much more. And the mainstream media has a responsibility to cover it and to cover it fully. We very rarely, I don't think I've ever played the media bias card, and I'm not playing it now. But to have that type of a mission in their kind of year in review coverage helps set a narrative that is not complimentary, I think, of media overall and how they've approached it. It puts a lot of reporters on defense. And I think that it's always important that we're looking at what reporters are covering and their stories are. But to think that it hasn't been covered is BS. But I'm also of the opinion that more should be done. And the Star Tribune, in not covering their year in review, shouldn't be making it so easy for their critics.
Yeah, I will lean into the media bias a little bit.
Lean away.
I have some great reporters that I have worked with over the years at the Star Tribune, at Axios. You mentioned Lou Raguse. We've seen Jay Coles do great things. We've seen the Minnesota Reformer, which is not necessarily the friendliest outlet to Republicans, do great work on fraud.
Alpha News.
When we see the Star Tribune on this, we can look at this issue right now. We can look at their recent story criticizing it's not $1 billion in fraud, days before the federal government comes out and says it might be $8 or $9 billion in fraud. They are also the ones that posted that BS op-ed from Governor Walz claiming that he's on top of it and fixing the problem, and don't look behind the curtain, we're all good here. And if we want to lean into some of the media bias and what is being alluded to because of these things, I mean, I'll just put it out there, and we don't need to have further commentary on it, but the CEO and publisher of the Star Tribune was a commissioner under Governor Walz. And so if you want to look into that, you can look into that. I just think it's a weird spot to be in when you literally this was a year in review. It wasn't super lengthy and in depth about these. To simply not even mention it and have one line linking back to a previous story about something is just odd and feels very intentional to leave it out. So we'll just leave it at that. I think it's very interesting. And like you said, just emboldens critics to have more ammo to target media in general.
Great points.
Moving on, last thing. Well, it is the last week. It's a nail biter. First place feels pretty. Ben
Easy.
Our first place is Ben Golnick, standing at 176 points. We have Kevin Poindexter, who had a great week.
Sure.
In second at 174. You're in third at 171. and I am tied with Julius at 170. So you're just 1 point ahead of me.
And 5 points out of lead, which can happen because in the interest of disclosure, Ben Gomlich didn't make his picks late, and I had to fill him in late for him out of an issue of fairness, which I like to be fair. I like to run a fair league. Look, my objective is very clear in the season. It's to beat you. Mm-hmm. That's first and foremost my objective. And it appears, and there's no reason to think that that's not going to happen. I have a very, very comfortable lead. Who I'm really got my pants in a bundle about is this Kevin Poindexter.
I know.
He's coming in here and he's battling for the top. I don't like it. And we'll be talking about that off air. But I'm feeling very confident. I will note that in my family fantasy football league, I am currently in the championship against my son.
Wow.
And I feel very confident that my son is gonna, that I'm gonna come out on top.
You're just gonna ground him and not allow him to have access to his electronics.
I had not thought about that, but that's a really good. No, I run a fair system. I can beat him fair and square. But again, I just want to set the mark. Beating you is my first priority.
All right.
Okay.
I will just say I also have to just call out. I was one of only 2 in our league that chose the Vikings to beat the Lions, and guess who got a point there?
The Vikings won. Yes. I'm playing.
And we had something like, I think 8 or 9 games that you and I chose differently, and somehow evened out to either being tied or you up by 1 for the week. I mean, it's wild that we had that many games we chose differently and not one of us ran away with it.
I want to remind our listeners that it is Vikings-Packers this weekend. I will be there with my wife and other family members.
Wow.
And we had an old episode where we had the spouses on talking about that game. Are you picking the Packers to win this weekend?
No, because they're having like a third-string quarterback and their guys aren't playing. So,
good to know.
No, Vikings all the way.
Yeah, I'll be there. I'm picking the Vikings this weekend. They're not going to let me down.
Perfect.
Becky, I want to thank you again for an extra special episode of The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Welcome to 2026. Thank you for doing this today. We want to thank our listeners for joining us for this episode of The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before you go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform where you listen. You can also follow us on our website and across all social media platforms at @BBBreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will be back next week. Happy New Year, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.